Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and you're listening to the Bible in a Year podcast, where we encounter God's voice and live life through the lens of Scripture. The Bible in a Year podcast is brought to you by Ascension. Using the Great Adventure Bible timeline, we'll read all the way from Genesis to Revelation, discovering how the story of salvation unfolds and how we fit into that story today. It is day 307. We're reading 2 Maccabees chapter 10, Wisdom chapters 9 and 10, and Proverbs chapter 25, verses 4 through 7. As always, the Bible translation I'm reading from is the Revised Standard Version, the Second Catholic Edition. I'm using the Great Adventure Bible from Ascension. If you want to download your own Bible in a Year reading plan, you can visit ascensionpress.com/Bible in a Year. You can also subscribe to this podcast by clicking on subscribe and receiving daily episodes. Also, a little shout out to all of those who don't merely listen, but also read along on YouTube, because I think you can subscribe to that too. Oh man, subscriptions all over the place. Subscriptions abound on day 307 as we're reading 2 Maccabees chapter 10, Wisdom chapter 9 and 10, and Proverbs chapter 25, verses 4 through 7. The second book of the Maccabees, chapter 10, the purification of the temple. Now Maccabeus and his followers, the Lord leading them on, recovered the temple and the city, and they tore down the altars which had been built in the public square by the foreigners, and also destroyed the sacred precincts. They purified the sanctuary, and made another altar of sacrifice. Then, striking fire out of flint, they offered sacrifices after a lapse of 2 years, and they burned incense and lighted lamps, and set out the bread of the presence. And when they had done this, they fell prostrate and begged the Lord that they might never again fall into such misfortunes, but that if they should ever sin, they might be disciplined by him with forbearance and not be handed over to blasphemous and barbarous nations. It happened that on the same day on which the sanctuary had been profaned by the foreigners, the purification of the sanctuary took place, that is, on the 25th day of the same month, which was Chislev. And they celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing, in the manner of the Feast of Booths, remembering how not long before, during the Feast of Booths, they had been wandering in the mountains and caves like wild animals. Therefore, bearing ivy-wreathed wands and beautiful branches, and also fronds of palm, they offered hymns of thanksgiving to him who had given success to the purifying of his own holy place. They decreed by public ordinance and vote that the whole nation of the Jews should observe these days every year. Such then was the end of Antiochus, who was called Epiphanes. Now we will tell what took place under Antiochus Eupator, who was the son of that ungodly man, and will give a brief summary of the principal calamities of the wars. This man, when he succeeded to the kingdom, appointed one Lysaeus to have charge of the government and to be chief governor of Coel Syria and Phoenicia. Ptolemy, who was called Macron, took the lead in showing justice to the Jews because of the wrong that had been done to them, and attempted to maintain peaceful relations with them. As a result, he was accused before Eupator by the king's friends. He heard himself called a traitor at every turn, because he had abandoned Cyprus, which Philometor had entrusted to him, and had gone over to Antiochus Epiphanes. Unable to command the respect due his office, he took poison and ended his life. Campaign in Idumea. When Gorgias became governor of the region, he maintained a force of mercenaries, and at every turn kept on warring against the Jews. Besides this, the Idumeans, who had control of important strongholds, were harassing the Jews. They received those who were banished from Jerusalem and endeavored to keep up the war. But Maccabeus and his men, after making solemn supplication and begging God to fight on their side, rushed to the strongholds of the Idumeans. Attacking them vigorously, they gained possession of the places and beat off all who fought upon the wall and slew those whom they encountered, killing no fewer than 20,000. When no less than 9,000 took refuge in 2 very strong towers well equipped to withstand a siege, Maccabeus left Simon and Joseph, and also Zacchaeus and his men, a force sufficient to besiege them, and he himself set off for places where he was more urgently needed. But the men with Simon, who were money-hungry, were bribed by some of those who were in the towers, and on receiving 70,000 drachmas let some of them slip away. When word of what had happened came to Maccabeus, he gathered the leaders of the people and accused these men of having sold their brethren for money by setting their enemies free to fight against them. Then he slew these men who had turned traitor, and immediately captured the 2 towers. Having success at arms in everything he undertook, he destroyed more than 20,000 in the 2 strongholds. Judas defeats Timothy. Now Timothy, who had been defeated by the Jews before, gathered a tremendous force of mercenaries and collected the cavalry from Asia in no small number. He came on, intending to take Judea by storm. As he drew near, Maccabeus and his men sprinkled dust upon their heads and put on sackcloth in supplication to God. Falling upon the steps before the altar, they begged him to be gracious to them and to be an enemy to their enemies and an adversary to their adversaries, as the law declares. And rising from their prayer, they took up their arms and advanced a considerable distance from the city, and when they came near to the enemy, they halted. Just as dawn was breaking, the two armies joined battle, the one having as pledge of success and victory not only their valor, but their reliance upon the Lord, while the other made rage their leader in the fight. When the battle became fierce, there appeared to the enemy from heaven 5 resplendent men on horses with golden bridles, and they were leading the Jews. Surrounding Maccabeus and protecting him with their own armor and weapons, they kept him from being wounded. And they showered arrows and thunderbolts upon the enemy, so that, confused and blinded, they were thrown into disorder and cut to pieces. 20,500 were slaughtered, besides 600 horsemen. Timothy himself fled to a stronghold called Gazara, especially well garrisoned, where Chaereas was commander. Then Maccabeus and his men were glad, and they besieged the fort for 4 days. The men within, relying on the strength of the place, blasphemed terribly and hurled out wicked words. But at dawn of the 5th day, 20 young men in the army of Maccabeus, fired with anger because of the blasphemies, bravely stormed the wall and with savage fury cut down everyone they met. Others who came up in the same way wheeled around against the defenders and set fire to the towers. They kindled fires and burned the blasphemers alive. Others broke open the gates and let in the rest of the force, and they occupied the city. They killed Timothy, who was hidden in a cistern, and his brother Chaereas and Apollophanes. When they had accomplished these things, with hymns and thanksgiving, they blessed the Lord, who shows great kindness to Israel and gives them the victory. The wisdom of Solomon. So I appealed to the Lord and implored him, and with my whole heart I said. Chapter 9. The Prayer of Solomon. O God of my fathers, and Lord of mercy, who have made all things by your word, and by your wisdom have formed man, to have dominion over the creatures you have made, and rule the world in holiness and righteousness, and pronounce judgment in uprightness of soul. Give me the wisdom that sits by your throne, and do not reject me from among your servants. For I am your slave, and the son of your maidservant, a man who is weak and short-lived, with little understanding of judgment and laws. For even if one is perfect among the sons of men, yet without the wisdom that comes from you, he will be regarded as nothing. You have chosen me to be king of your people, and to be judge over your sons and daughters. You have given command to build a temple on your holy mountain, and an altar in the city of your habitation, a copy of the holy tent which you prepared from the beginning. With you is wisdom, who knows your works and was present when you made the world.